Hello and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn presentation on film preservation. This is presented by the Society of American Archivists, the Archivists of Religious Collections section. We would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many indigenous nations. We know that indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices, and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with indigenous communities. We respect the long-standing relationships that indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We're grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. As a disclaimer, the content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work necessarily. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide. It is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any of the accompanying materials. During today's Lunch and Learn, you will not be able to use your microphone or video. You can click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the screen and select Live Transcript. Click Enable Auto Transcription to get closed captioning. There will be a question and answer period after the presentation concludes. You should please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. We will not answer questions in the chat or unmute attendees due to time constraints. Please be respectful in your interactions. We expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct, which can be viewed at that link. The session will be recorded. We do ask that you please fill out the short survey after the session ends. And if you are not already a member, we encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists. We thank the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada for hosting this webinar. With that being said, today's Lunch and Learn, is on film preservation. We are with Hannah Palin of the Moving Image Preservation of Puget Sound. There's a lot of P words here.
There is.
Hannah Palin created the Moving Image Preservation Program at the University of Washington Libraries Special Collections and is one of the founders of the Moving Image Preservation of Puget Sound. She co-authored the Washington State Film Preservation Manual, Low Cost and No Cost Suggestions to Care for Your Film, and Starting from Nothing, The Care of Creating a Film Archive with Nicolette Bromberg, Visual Materials Curator for the UW Library Special Collections. As a sidebar, Hannah, I keep that University of Washington link. I absolutely keep that bookmarked for my film questions.
Wonderful. Oh, that makes me happy.
She taught workshops on moving image preservation for the Society of American Archivists, the University of Oregon, and the University of Washington. She serves on the board of the Association of Moving Image Archivists. Hannah, thank you very much for being here,
Oh,
and you can take it away.
okay, I will give it a try. So bear with me while I share my screen and get this thing rolling, which of course, no, I can't do it. Play from start. That's what I want to do. So hopefully everybody can see that. So again, my name is Hannah Palin. I was a co-founder of Moving Image Preservation of Puget Sound. We're a nonprofit 501c3 corporation formed to help preserve our cultural heritage by assisting archives, libraries, and other organizations with the conversion of analog video recordings to digital formats according to archival best practices. MIPops supports videotape digitization and preservation by heritage organizations with neither the resources nor expertise to address these at-risk materials. We work with regional nonprofit organizations with videotape materials in their collections, including documentaries, oral histories, artistic works, theatrical and dance performances, public works, industrial and educational content, orphan productions, and other footage. There is some amazing content out there on videotape. Who knew? I was also the moving image curator at the University of Washington Library's Special Collections for 20 years. And while I was there, I focused primarily on building the film and videotape collections, including regional independent filmmakers, home movies, amateur films, and an extensive news library from the local CBS affiliate in Seattle. So I have always been dedicated to spreading the gospel, pardon my pun, spreading the gospel, if you will, of moving image preservation. And my mission today is to give you the basics so that when you go back to that shelf in your library or archive and you see that box that's filled with film and maybe some videotape and audio tape and it just makes your head explode, I'm just going to give you some really basic ideas on how to get started. You don't need to be a film archivist. When you walk out of here, you don't need to conquer the world. You just need to figure out what to do with that shoebox and how to tackle it so that you can make some really good decisions on making that material available to the folks who use your archive or your library. So I keep saying moving images, moving images, moving images, but what is that? So I'm going to roll back and start at the very beginning. So film hinges on the concept of persistence of vision, which is an optical illusion that occurs when the human eye continues to see an image after it has disappeared from view. It's also known as retinal persistence. And in movies, the eye retains the image of each frame long enough to create the illusion of smooth motion. So in 1879, English photographer Edward Muybridge invented the zoopraxiscope. I love the early names of early cinema, early equipment. They're fabulous. So he invented the zoopraxiscope, which is a device that is credited as being the first motion picture projector. And so Muybridge, he's quite the character, and I really recommend you going and reading about him because he's a kick. But he's really best known for his pioneering work in photographic studies of motion, particularly capturing sequential images of animals and humans in movement. And this laid the groundwork for the development of cinema. Essentially, he's considered the father of motion picture photography due to his groundbreaking research on capturing movement through photography. Now, as the story goes, he famously settled a bet. Oops, and there it all goes. He famously settled a bet for Leland Stanford by photographing a horse in mid stride, proving that all four legs were off the ground at a certain point during its gait. My apologies for the YouTube array here. Oh, and there we got him. The horse is back. So you can see where the four legs are off the ground at any given moment. So the other thing, as the art of motion pictures evolved, filmmakers began experimenting, but they started with what they knew, creating is now called actualities. It's a nonfiction film, usually lasting no more than 1 or 2 minutes, showing unedited, unstructured footage of real events, places, people, things. So here's an example of an early home movie. It's a genre that is probably in your collection. I love home movies. I think they're fabulous. And this was shot by the Lumiere brothers. They were French manufacturers of photography equipment, best known for the cinematograph motion picture system and the short films they produced between 1895 and 1905. And it places them among the earliest filmmakers. And one of the reasons I wanted to show this is because it is so universal. You have mom, dad, baby, and feeding and like hanging out with the kid outside. I mean, it's universal and it's been happening for decades, for centuries, obviously. But having a photograph, having a moving image of this is so important because it shows that we're all the same. So by preserving the past, we're also informing the future. So this is a compilation of short films, also by the Lumiere brothers, and it's from a commemorative DVD. Therefore, the really weird bad music. Sorry, and it was issued a few years ago. And I wanted to share this because most of us have this type of film in our collection. Obviously, not the Lumiere brothers, but this kind of really down to earth documentation of the world around us, and it captures so much about us and who we are and where we've been. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work. I really feel like being able to preserve these older images helps inform who we are in the present. So here we go.
Hannah, if I can interrupt, is this
Oh,
still meant to be silent?
oh, poop. No. Hold on one second. We set it up before and oops, shush, 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 shush. We set it up before and I think what happened is that yeah, that went away.
Well,
So one
go do it for mono. Do mono, not
do oh did
stereo.
oh okay, that's good to know. Sorry everybody. I had some issues and had to
Okay,
pop out of my Zoom earlier when we were practicing. So optimize. So shall we try that?
good.
That work? Woo! Okay. Thank you. Okay, yeah, we don't need to see the rest of the credits for that. So I just find that so endearing because it's life as it was in the 1890s and it's still relevant today. So this next is a clip from a Edison documentary on the American experience. And this particular section does a really good job of just describing what is film. And I thought I would share this with you guys. So um, it's uh, it's just a few minutes long. So here we go.
Further inspiration had been found during a visit to Paris in 1889, where Edison had met French scientist Etienne Jules Marey, whose chronophotography captured 12 consecutive images per second on a long, continuous piece of film.
Marey had been filming birds by converting a gun into a camera, so that as he pulled the trigger, he was actually taking rapid pictures of them with strip film. And this influenced Edison to go back and experiment with roll film.
Motion picture technology is difficult. You have to have film that stops, gets the image, advances, stops, gets the next image, and it has to do that 20, 30 times a second. So you need film that can take the beating. You need film that's sensitive enough to do it. Edison worked with George Eastman to develop the film with the sprocket holes, figuring out how the machinery is going to advance the film, stop it, advance the film, stop it. And he developed a really terrific camera, and that was his contribution.
Throughout, Edison had worked closely with his assistant in the mining operation, a sometime photographer named William Dixon, who was largely responsible for the optics of the device. Now, Dixon had begun to produce the first films in what eventually would be the Edison Company's extensive catalog, a collection of short features meant to be shown one at a time on a coin-operated peephole viewing cabinet called a kinetoscope.
The first motion picture entertainment device was an ingenious contraption that allowed you to see a loop of film, a very short loop.
The inaugural batch of kinetoscopes shipped from West Orange in April 1894. 5 to Atlantic City, 10 to Chicago, and 10 to a small storefront in Manhattan, a former shoe shop near Herald Square, soon to become the world's first commercial kinetoscope parlor.
They were setting up the machines, getting ready to open, and curiosity seekers had gathered, and they decided to let them in to give the machines a try. And it turned out to overwhelm them. The public poured in. The novelty of the thing was incredibly attractive.
So there we go. We take all that for granted at this point. So I wanted to say, nope, not again. As the years progressed, obviously more and more moving images were produced, and they were produced, created, shown, collected, and they wound up in archives and libraries and museums. There's so much stuff. What do we do now? So this is the more practical part of this presentation. So you have all of this stuff on all of these shelves, and what do you do with it? So I will confess, moving image preservation, it's not easy. It costs money. It requires really specialized, weird expertise. You need really strange, obsolete equipment, and it's a commitment. You have to make sure everybody in your institution is on board, and that they all feel the same need to preserve these materials and are willing to support it financially and in any other institutional way possible. But if you don't do anything, this is what could possibly happen. That's some nitrate film. It's pretty scary. But really, all you need to know are these 5 things. And if you have these 5 basic pieces of information in your arsenal, you'll be able to make informed decisions about your collection and to try to get that information out to the public. And sometimes it doesn't even have to cost very much. So I'm going to go through all of these one by one so that you can get them in your head. So a film gauge, it is the distance between one edge of film to the other, and it's measured in millimeters. And 35 millimeter is the earliest. So all that film that you just saw, that was all on 35 millimeter. And it's the largest, the widest, and it's the earliest. And it ran from the late 1800s, as we saw, to the 1950s. Well, it still exists to this day, but its film stock production has diminished incredibly. But 35 millimeter was also used for commercial films, for feature films. That's what you saw when you went to the cinema. The next thing, in 1923, Edison, forever the innovator in cinema technology, created 16 millimeter. And this is half as big, obviously. So it's 16 millimeters from edge to edge. It was used to gather news. It was used to make industrial and commercial films. It was used for amateur films and also for art films because the stock was less expensive. So people who were interested in creating documentary or creating a piece of art might use 16 millimeter because it was less expensive than 35. Also, it was used by home filmmakers. So a lot of early home movies in 1923 were shot on 16 millimeter. In 1932, they halved it again and created 8 millimeter. And it is really tiny from edge to edge. And it was used almost exclusively for home movies and amateur films. And what was really fascinating to me about 8 millimeter, it's what almost all home movies are shot on 8 millimeter in this time period from the 30s to the 60s. And it actually democratizes filmmaking in the way that videotape does it later on. In the sense that the film is smaller, the equipment is smaller, everything is less expensive. Like if you were an early adopter in 1923 and wanted to get a 16 millimeter film setup, it was the equivalent of like $10,000 in today's money, probably even more. But 8 millimeter was accessible. You could buy the film at the grocery store or the drugstore. You could find the cameras for very little money, and they were portable. They went everywhere. So in this particular era, and it's why I love home movies, is you start to see all kinds of demographics and all kinds of experiences in the United States. And it's really fascinating to me. In 1965, yet another innovation. Super 8mm, and it is the same exact width as 8mm, but they moved the frame out a little bit and made it bigger, and then made the perforations, which are on the very edge, and that's what runs the film, keeps the film moving through a camera and through a projector. Those are spaced closer together so it runs at a faster speed, and that's what makes it super. So it was used again for amateur films, home movies, and actually filmmakers, art filmmakers, artisans used it as well. So, so those are the four main film gauges that you will find in American archives. There are a couple of other ones that 9.5 was predominantly European. There's 70mm, there's all kinds of other things, but these are what you're probably going to find in an American archive. So the film base is the film stock. It's an analog medium, and it's used for recording motion picture or animations. It's a strip or sheet of transparent plastic film base coated on one side with gelatin emulsion that contains microscopically small, light-sensitive silver halide crystals. And the sizes and other characteristics of the crystals determine the sensitivity, contrast, and resolution of the film. So when you're looking at a piece of film, there's one side that is the base, and then the emulsion is spread on top and is held there by a binder. And there's really two main compositions of plastic film base that you'll find. Cellulose nitrate from the 1890s to the 1950s, and that is exclusively 35mm. So, and it actually was composed of, nitrate is very flammable and was phased out in the 1950s. If you've ever seen Inglourious Basterds, the film by Quentin Tarantino, you know that nitrate is actually used as a plot device to try to kill Hitler. So nitrate is it can be incredibly stable, but it can also be very problematic. The likelihood of it being in one of your collections is kind of minimal. I had very little of it when I was at the University of Washington, but it does require special attention. It's gorgeous if you see it projected, because the silver is really beautiful, and it's a big what do I want to say? A big frame on the screen projected. But anyway, but the next one that you're going to find in archives are cellulose acetate, and that was developed in 1923 as safety film. So because remember, in 1923 they introduced 16mm, so it's a consumer format. So the last thing you wanted to do was send out a flammable product out into people's homes. So they developed cellulose acetate, so it removed the nitrate, and it is a form that was not flammable as such. And it was nickname was safety film. In the 1950s, polyester was introduced and was used a lot as a preservation medium. I don't have a lot of experience with polyester. I actually didn't really run into it in my experience at the university, but it's out there. So the other piece of information that you can glean is date codes. And this is a fascinating thing. It's mostly Kodak. Some of the other manufacturers did it too, but it was their way of keeping track of when the film was manufactured. So there's some marks on the very edge of the film stock. You can see in the two pictures that are here, like right around where the perforations in the film, where those holes are. They used a series of symbols to tell when they manufactured the film, and they use them every 20 years. So you can, if you hold the film up to the light using a loupe, which is an eyeglass, you can, if you look on the edge, you'll be able to see a circle, a square, a triangle, and try to determine when this film was manufactured. And then by the content of what you're seeing in that frame, you can also determine what the time period might be. If there's, a Studebaker, it's probably not from the 70s. So, well, maybe not. Anyway, but it indicates when the film stock was made, not necessarily when it was shot. But if you have Kodak film, which you're probably almost always going to have in your collection, that is a great way to tell when the film was shot. Also, there's information on the label that people scribble all over cans and all over liters. So there's another way to tell when it was made. Film is measured in footage, not cubic feet. So it's the length of the film in feet as it is wrapped around a reel or a core. So, and that's measured in the standards, as you see here, 400, 800, 1200, 1600, and 2000 feet. Doesn't really go past 2000 feet because those are huge reels and they get really heavy and they're really difficult for a projector, for the mechanics in a projector to keep moving through the transport mechanism. So it's, if you can learn what that measurement is, then it enables you to talk to vendors, and it allows you to figure out what kind of storage you need and how much space it's going to take up on a shelf. So it takes a little practice, but it's doable. So getting from camera to screen at any given time in analog land was really difficult. And I'm going to show you this next slide. You don't have to memorize it. It's just to show you what people were up to. And this is also in case you happen to have any filmmakers in your collection. So if you have somebody that was an independent filmmaker that was shooting, like we had Ruth and Louis Kirk, who shot footage of the Pacific Northwest and made television programs and also films to show to distribute on the educational market. So they would shoot the film and record the audio. So those are two separate objects that would be on my shelf. They developed it into, actually there's the next one, but they develop the film and they create audio scratch tracks. They go through the editing process and try to figure out what goes where. And then when they finally get the film figured out just the way they want it, then they mark it up and they would send it off to the lab. The lab would make a print that conformed to their instructions, and then they'd have a final print that then they would create copies of to send out onto the market. The reason to tell you all this is that means you're going to have all those things sitting on your shelf. It can be really overwhelming and it can make your brain explode. So and you don't have to memorize these. You don't really have to know about them. It's just to let you know that, like, I always use the example Life Cycle of the Oyster because it's a film I saw at a sale once and it made me laugh. So you see that one film and you know that you put that on a projector and you show it and you get a story. But what you don't know, and what archivists, the big dirty secret is, that we know that all these different reels of film went into making that final object. Just to let you know. Now, the cool thing, there's this one thing, it says camera original negative and reversal. And reversal stock is what home movies are made on. And what that means is the stock for reversal stock essentially went into the camera, was exposed to light, you took it out, sent it off to be developed, and the exact same thing came back to you as a positive, and that's what you put onto your projector. So home movies in particular are shot on reversal stock because they didn't want to create something that the home movie maker needed to have a negative and a print and all those things I just talked about. So when you're holding a home movie, it is the camera original. It's that reversal stock was touched by the people who actually shot it. So you're going to need analog equipment to work on some of this. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but essentially, you can, what the picture in the middle with the film going through from one set of one reel to the next, that's essentially called a film bench, and it has all the elements that you might need to be able to just scroll through a film and see the content. So I'm going to talk about different types of deterioration, and I'll go into all of these. These are all examples from my time at the University of Washington. Yuck. They were pretty bad. So there's three types, and I'll go into all of these. So mechanical, chemical, and biological. And so mechanical is changes in size and shape. So this was a box of film that I found in the sports collection where it fell apart and somebody just stuffed it into a box. So mechanical means somebody stepped on it, it got crunched in the projector, it's all those perforation holes got ripped somehow, and so it's like tearing a piece of paper. You know what I mean? It's just ripping that thing apart and changing the actual structure of the physical object. Chemical, this is examples of nitrate deterioration. So that's a cellulose nitrate that I was talking about. It has some really distinct stages, and it starts bubbling. That's really fun. And then at the end, it just turns to dust and to powder. And I've only encountered one reel that was in the bubbly stage, and otherwise, most of the nitrate I've encountered has been in amazingly good condition. There's also acetate deterioration is much more prevalent, at least in my experience. And what happens as the cellulose acetate begins to deteriorate, it releases acetic acid, and that acetic acid smells like pickles. So it's also called vinegar syndrome. So if you start getting wafts of pickles from your collection, then that means that your cellulose acetate is breaking down. And as it breaks down, it loses pliability, it begins curling and twisting, and eventually doesn't quite turn to dust, but it becomes absolutely unplayable. So it's definitely worth something. And it's usually really stable for a long time, and then it kind of hits an autocatalytic point and just starts to disintegrate terribly. The other kind of chemical deterioration is color fading. So in this case, it usually applies to prints. So, and that means that all the dyes start to fade except for this lovely magenta. I don't know that Mr. Wayne would have been pleased at being bright pink, but there's really nothing you can do about it. And it's kind of, it's just the nature of the beast. You could digitize it and do color correction, but then you have to ask yourself if it's worth the time and energy for that particular print that might be in wide distribution. So these are biological is the next category. And these are all, again, from the University of Washington. So you have, there's mold, and there's an egg casing, and there's actual bugs, which were ladybugs for some reason. And then cat urine. That was fun. Some people kept their collection in a garage, and then the local neighborhood cats found it and started urinating on it. So it actually had kind of interesting crystals, but but it very much ate through the emulsion of those particular reels of film. So you gathered all this information. You have an idea of when your film was shot, what gauge it is, and even what basic condition it might be in, how big, how long, how much. Now what do you do? So there's some really, really simple things that you can do that don't cost a penny. Well, maybe a penny, because you really should have some gloves and a loop. But other than that, so, and you guys probably all know a lot of this stuff anyway, but you can make a case file. I am a big fan of spreadsheets, for better or for worse. And then you can take all of those, let's say you have the shoebox of film. If you get them a little bit organized before you start, and you can, if luckily, maybe there'll be some notes on the outside that somebody said this was shot in 1952 and this was from 1943, and you can put them in some kind of date order, or you can look for those, those date codes and do the same thing. Kind of get them in order, and then I really, 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 really recommend just taking a piece of tape, like a blue painter's tape, or there's white film tape that I use all the time. That doesn't stick very much. It doesn't cause any damage because it's really temporary. And go through and just number everything. Just number the can and the film reel and the can if it's in a can, and then put all those things, inventory them, put them into your database with the different categories for those 5 different things we just talked about. And then you've got a spreadsheet. You've got a whole chunk of information that you've collected about this information, about this collection. If you can find any content information, sometimes it'll be like, Johnny's first birthday, or a trip to Disneyland, or what do I want to say? Negative for first shot, first take for life cycle of the oyster. I will stop using that any minute now. And then you can do a little research too. If you have a film that is like, it's a film print, is it out there in the world? What is it? Who shot it? What, you can do a WorldCat search and find out what it is. And then films get stored flat and videos get stored like a book. There's some variations to that, but just go with it for now. Films flat, videos like a book. And then you can appraise the collection for future actions. Like, did you find like FDR is mentioned that it might be on this particular home movie, or is that documentary film about one of the most like a bridge that no longer exists, or a building that's gone, or a previous mayor? We found a home movie that had our first female mayor from Seattle, and it was from 1924. So, that's important. So we saved that. We raised money for that one. And then there's a way with all of this information, and still so far you've only spent money on a loop and some gloves, and well, maybe of course labor. There's always that. But now you can create access for researchers. And what we used to do is just create a collection guide, or you can do an accessioning record, you can put your inventory online, whatever mechanics that your institution has. Even though you haven't digitized the collection, that doesn't matter. It just matters that people understand that you have the material. Maybe they want to digitize it. Maybe they want to pay to digitize it, or maybe they want to come in and look at it if you have the ability to let them do that. But if you get it up and out and online some way, somehow, then that is worth all the time that you just spent. So there's low cost preservation solutions. The next step is that you can set up one of those film benches. You can put your film in archival cans and cores, and you can clean and repair it. You can add leader to it. You can actually, if you have a basic film bench, you won't be able to hear the audio probably, depending on what kind of toys you get, but you can see the content. You'll be able to scroll through and see who, what, and where. So that is also something that you can do, that you can help you and describe it. Now, if you really got some cash, you can do a full cost film preservation solution. It would be to get the film professionally transferred or digitized. And that way you can, it will be very, it will be preserved and much more available to the public. You can also reformat videotape formats, obsolete videotape formats. The gold standard for years was film to film preservation, but film stock is getting rarer and rarer and more difficult to find. So I would suggest the highest resolution professional film digitization that you can possibly get. And then once you start the digitization process, I really encourage you, if you don't, and I have a feeling everybody already has this in place, but if you don't, start thinking about how you're going to store these files. They are enormous. When I left the university, I had 50 terabytes just sitting on one shelf. So you have to kind of wrap your head around how much this is going to be. And then, do you have the digital infrastructure to contain all of this, to support all of it? And if you do, power to you, keep going. But if you don't, make sure that you do some future thinking to try to future-proof all of these files. And of course, keeping the original film safe and happy is most important, because as we know, all of the technology keeps shifting so fast that you just never know what's gonna come down the pike. So there's 3 options. So you can start as small as you want to. And obviously, if you have everything digitized, you get to put it online. Yay! And you can do, your own digital infrastructure or your digital collections. There's also, we use the Internet Archive at MIPops a lot because it is, and it doesn't cost anything. It's just labor intensive, but you could still get all of the material out to the public. So now you've got all this and you've got it so that it's available and you have digital files or you have copies and you want to share. And there are so many cool things that you can do out there that I'm going to see if I can show you some quick examples, and I'll talk for a second if I can get this to play. Maybe. There we go. So I'll turn that down a little bit. So Saturday is Home Movie Day. It happens every year. It's been going on since 2003, and it's a celebration of amateur films and home movies, and it takes place across the planet. So I would encourage you to go to the Center for Home Movies and see what people are doing, see if there's something in your area that might be of interest, and see, or think about maybe next year hosting your own. I've been doing it since the first year with a couple of breaks here and there, and it is hard, but it's fun and it's fabulous, and you see some incredible things, and it's a great way to connect with your community. One of the things too is like the Southside Home Movie Project, which was on the previous slide. They do this kind of screening, and they do it with like they've done it outdoors, like an outdoor movie event, and with a live DJ playing. So there are lots of ways to do this kind of work and get the community engaged and make an event that celebrates your archive and celebrates the visual heritage of the region that you're in. So again, home movies, some of my favorite things in the world. So there's Center for Home Movies. Here, I'll stop this. So if you go to homemovieday.com or the Center for Home Movies, you can find out more information about that. And then one of the things that we do at MIPops is that we do a quarterly screening of all the films that or the videotapes in this case, that we've digitized with local partnering institutions. And I just thought I'd play this one because it's pretty fun. And it was one of my collections that's closest to my heart is television news. So I'm going to go ahead and play this one that we showed in 2019, it looks like.
Live from Seattle.
Who makes news? The people you know, multiplied by the people they know, multiplied by the people everyone's heard of, and on to infinity.
My co-founder, Libby Hopfop's husband plays in a band. So he always does the music for us. So really quick, because I'm going to wrap everything up. There's some fantastic resources out in the world, including the one that I helped co-author, Washington State Film Preservation Manual. It's out of date. We really needed to update it, and we never quite got the chance when I was at the university, but it's still helpful, and it talks about a lot of the stuff that I just mentioned. That's online. The National Film Preservation Foundation, the Film Preservation Guide is fabulous. Chapter 3 how to set up a film bench. I highly recommend it. There's also a lot of guides online now that go through identification and assessment of different videotape and film as well. So like the one that I have up here as a screenshot is the Texas Commission for the Arts on the Arts. It's a videotape identification and assessment guide, and there's a lot of them. I think there's one from Indiana University, I think, or the University of Illinois, sorry, is out there. So there's a lot of different ways. You can just do a search, and I swear all the information that you need will pop up. There are also, I'd like to say that we have some great information about videotape on the MIPops page. There's also some great white papers out there. So years ago when I was trying to figure out when digital preservation was kind of happening, and I kept like, what is the codec? What are you people talking about? I found Audiovisual Preservation Solutions had some great white papers on how to do file naming and what is a codec and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of wonderful information out there once you start knowing what you're looking for. So, and I think, oh, and one other thing I just wanted to bring up, because I was thinking of my fellows in North Carolina and Florida and all the places that have been affected by disasters lately. The Association of Moving Image Archivists is giving a 2-day symposium on disaster planning as it relates to audiovisual collections. And it's next, what is that, Wednesday and Thursday, 9 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific. Or 9 to 12:30 Pacific. I encourage you to do a little search for that one. And it's got a great lineup. There is a fee for it, but hopefully it's something that will be important and that you can get some great information, so that as current climate change keeps sneaking up on us and creating disasters and havoc wherever we go, we'll be able to figure it out. So that's my last plug. So there's my contact information. You can always get in touch with me. We do have a newsletter that I try to put out on a semi-regular basis. And with that, I'm ready to take questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking and let you guys let me know how I can help.
Sure thing. Thank you very much. That is a lot, and it's getting into some of that scary area of the archival world for a lot of us here.
Sorry.
Question.
Yeah.
Is safety film still in major use at all? And this may mean, obviously, it's in a lot of our collections. I think that might mean in production.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I think Kodak is still producing film stock on a regular basis, but it's not as much as it used to. And it is definitely safety film. And it's, there's nothing that's going to turn on you, so to speak.
And I'm going to ask my own follow-up here.
Yeah.
Is acetate vinegar syndrome, is that harmful to people at all? Should I be wearing a K95 when handling that?
It's not going to kill you, but it causes irritation when I've made the mistake of going and sniffing it like a dummy, and I'll have like particles in my nose for a little bit. So a mask is always a good idea when you're handling anything that's got mold or that kind of deterioration. Yeah, but it's not something that yeah. Like I said, it's not great, but it's not gonna melt your sinuses. Sorry. Not a good answer to that.
How can someone tell if there is sound on a film, especially with 8mm and Super 8?
Gotcha.
Or even 16?
Sure. Well, what they would do is there's two different types of sound on film. So you have, I don't have an example in front of me. I'm so sorry. But, so you have your strip of film, and there's one side with little holes in it. And the other side, if it has holes on both sides, it's silent. If it has holes on one side and then a little strip of what looks like copper, that is a magnetic recording material, kind of like a cassette. And so that has sound. And then the other option is that there's a little tiny strip on this side that has an itty bitty waveform in it. and that is optical sound. So when you look at the piece of film, if you see like holes on one side and then something, if you hold it up to the light and you see something that looks like a little zigzaggy waveform, then it's sound. 8 and Super 8, 8 millimeter almost exclusively is silent. Every once in a while, someone would magnetic stripe that film and record something later. So like, and it's very rare in the grand scheme of things. So if you have Super 8 with sound, it'll have that little copper stripe on it. You do need a projector that can play sound. And there are Super 8 projectors that have the capacity to do that. So, but amateur film and 16 millimeter falls into the category of it either has the magnetic stripe or the print. The optical sound on the side. So, and yeah.
When digitizing for preservation, which video file format do you recommend?
Oh, so sorry. That one is so tricky. There's some open source. I believe it's MKV and there's a lot of different digital packages, and now they all just flew out of my brain. I found when I was digitizing in-house, because sometimes there were some things that even though I would love to sit, and this is heresy, not every single thing needs to have a 4K scan from a professional lab, especially like, let's say I was digitizing football practices from the University of Washington from 1972. They were great. People wanted to see them, but did it deserve $4,000 worth of film restoration? I'm really not sure. So I had a piece of equipment, super simple. It's called an Elmo. It was a film transfer projector that was used in newsrooms. And that I used just some very simple, I think it's called Elgato, but I ended up with like a high res MKV and a low res Access MP4. So, there's also, there's DCP as a cinema package, and that would be something that you would need if you were going to do a full restoration. So there's a lot of levels of it, and I'm not really answering the question very well. But at the highest resolution that you can possibly manage with the least amount of compression and with the least, the least amount of proprietariness. So like anything that you can swing that's open source.
Don't digitize into whatever Apple movie format.
Afraid not. I've done it. I admit it. But don't, if you can avoid it, please do. So there's some better resources than me on that one. So
I'm going to split this into two questions.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address copyright concerns at MIPops for things like home videos?
Mm-hmm. The thing, especially with MIPops, we're working directly with the institution, and they make that determination. But in terms of home movies are tricky because they're they're a diary, so they still have copyright attached to the person that created them, but sometimes it's orphan and you don't know who made it, or they no longer exist, or the family doesn't care. What we would do a lot of times for material that we had at the university, if it was copyrighted, we could get away with for educational use and be able to put it up online, but I couldn't license the footage to anybody. Like if I didn't have the copyright to an independent home movie or an independent film, and I couldn't find the particular producers or directors, so I just was like, well, you can look at it, but we can't repurpose it. I can't license it you can't use it in a documentary. It's just for informational purposes. One of the things I found by putting things online is that I admit that I tried to use kind of a lesser quality of and resolution so that it was all kind of small so that it couldn't be stolen. I mean, so somebody couldn't use it again in another commercial project. So, and I tried to track down uh, copyright holders as much as humanly possible. Sometimes it wasn't humanly possible.
Is that the same process you followed when working with the Internet Archive?
Yeah, yeah, as much as we can, so that it's not so anything that's up there, everybody it has permissions or it has provenance, and we know. And if somebody wants to cease and desist, it's fine. We will take it down, and it doesn't have to be up there anymore. So,
Um, for older films or films that are poorer quality or grainier, um, in your opinion, is it worth getting those films digitized at a very high resolution, considering the file
mm,
size and the original quality that is not going to be helped
right, it's
by
not
high
going to get any
resolution?
better. Yeah, I think it depends on the content, to be honest with you. You know, if it's if like we had a film that was at the university that was Charles Lindbergh visiting the Seattle, and it was in okay shape, but we were able to get it fully restored, and that felt good. You know, it's historic, and that's where we found Bertha Knight Landis. But it wasn't the greatest piece of film ever made, you know, so it just kind of depends. That for us was worth the cost of doing that. If it's not, as much as I say I love home movies, like, is it worth it? I'm not sure. You know, it might not be. I think it depends on the content and its value to you, to your institution. That's kind of my blanket answer for that one.
Can archival cores and cans be purchased at the regular standard archival supply companies, or is there a specialized company that we have to go to for those sorts of things?
Um, I do believe there's some at the standardized guys. There's also a supplier. It's Tuscan is one of them that pops into my head, and they have all the stuff. And when I say cores, it's a strange critter. It's a it's a plastic disc, and you put it into what's called a split reel. So you have to buy split reel. So it's got two pieces of, you know, like it screws together. The plastic disc goes in and you screw the two pieces together, and then you wind the film on it, and then you unscrew the pieces, and then you end up with a pancake. It's probably more information that you need, but that's what a core is. But they also have there's but there are some suppliers out there. There's Christie's, I think, and Tuscan is another one. Urbanski Film in Chicago has some stuff. So but you can also start with Gaylord and the other one that just Metal Edge and see what they have too.
Scenario, and hopefully this can be a quick one. I have a very large film type documents. It looks like a negative, but it is 3 feet by 4 feet. They are images of maps. How should I store these?
Oh golly, that sounds like sheet film though. So it's probably it's like, you know, like a photograph as opposed to a film. Because if it's 3 feet, wait, it's 3 feet, it's 3 feet, 4 feet. I don't know. Um, what who would have that? It sounds like it needs to go into a plastic sleeve if I'm thinking of the right, if I've got the right thing in
There
my head.
is a smell coming off.
Does it smell like pickles? If it smells like pickles, then yeah, if that one might be, if it's something that is important to the archive, then I might find a vendor and might get that digitized to be able to get the pickle away, and so that you have another object that's more accessible and available. I don't know if I really answered that, but the storage would be to definitely get it segregated and to get it isolated,
Sure.
and getting it into a sleeve would do that for sure.
Uh, Hannah, thank you very much. This was very, very informative and very, very worthwhile. To everybody still hanging around, this was our last webinar, Lunch and Learn of the year. Um, Usually this is where I would say what our next one is and give you a date and time. But I will say thank you very much for a year of these really, really great resources and webinars, and I will see you all in 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you.